Coming up today, South Korea suspends operations at the industrial complex it runs jointly with North Korea. Seoul says it's in response to Pyongyang's nuclear test and satellite launch. North Korean leader Kim Jongun has reportedly had his army chief of staff put to death. Reports say he was executed for corruption and pursuing personal gains. First Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen holds her interest rate cards close to her vest, but suggests further hikes could be delayed amid the ongoing economic unrest. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Thursday, February 11th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this morning, South Korea has suspended its operations at the joint Kaesong Industrial Complex with North Korea. Seoul's move to shut the factory park, which is a major source of income for North Korea, is in response to Pyongyang's continued provocations. Connie Kim starts us off.
South Korea says shutting down the Kaesong Industrial Park is a special measure as a means to pressure North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons program. Seoul's Unification Ministry sanctions come as Pyongyang carried out its nuclear test and launched its long-range ballistic missile.
We cannot curb North Korea's nuclear and missile development plans with existing response measures at such a grave situation. We must respond strongly with the international community to Pyongyang's wrong behaviors, and there is a need for special measures to pressure North Korea to give up nuclear weapons program and bring about change.
The ministry added operations of the industrial park have contributed to the North developing weapons of mass destruction and advancing its nuclear capabilities. The South Korean government and firms have invested some $854 million into the complex, the last remaining symbol of inter-Korean economic cooperation since it was launched in 2003. As for South Korean companies that will be pulling out from the complex, the government plans to support them, but the details need to be ironed out. Back in 2013, when Pyongyang pulled all of its workers from the complex, Seoul provided loans and special funds to the South Korean companies and made them tax-exempt. One ministry official also said they're reviewing the possibility of offering the 124 companies some kind of replacement sites as an alternative to their operations in the complex. But for now, restarting operations at the industrial park is not expected anytime soon. As South Korea said, the North will have to address the international community's concerns regarding its nuclear and missile development and create an environment for normal operations at the park. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
So, at this very early stage, it's unclear when or even if the Kaesong Industrial Complex will reopen. One thing we know for sure is that the inter-Korean complex has had a turbulent history. Kim Hae-sung has this report.
On the North Korean side of the demilitarized zone, the Kaesong Industrial Complex, the single joint business of the two Koreas, was launched in 2003 and opened in 2004. The joint park is largely financed by South Korea. The factory zone currently hosts more than 120 South Korean companies, which employ some 54,000 North Korean workers. The estate is a precious source of cash for the isolated and impoverished North. 2 years after its opening, the number of North Korean staff hit 10,000 workers. A year after, it doubled, and in 2012, it reached over 50,000. The accumulated earnings from goods produced at the complex rose from some $100 million in 2007 to $2 billion in 2013. Production at Kaesong accounted for 99% of inter-Korean trade last year. The business park, virtually the only form of economic cooperation between the two Koreas, has become increasingly vulnerable to turbulent swings in inter-Korean politics. In 2013, during a period of heightened cross-border tensions, Pyongyang effectively shut down the zone for 5 months by withdrawing its workers. 2.5 years since it reopened, the Kaesong Industrial Complex stands at a point where it could be shut down for good, putting an end to 13 years of operations. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea's National Assembly has passed a resolution condemning North Korea for its recent long-range ballistic missile launch. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
South Korea's National Assembly passed a resolution on Wednesday denouncing North Korea's recent missile launch. An overwhelming majority of lawmakers, 243 out of 292, voted in favor of the resolution, while 5 abstained. The remaining 44 were absent when the vote was called. The resolution urges Pyongyang to stop its weapons development and provocations and become a responsible member of the international community. It also calls on the South Korean government to strengthen its military readiness in close cooperation with the United States and work toward resolving the North Korean issue through dialogue with Pyongyang. National Assembly Speaker Chung Ih-hwa said North Korea's recent missile launch and fourth nuclear tests are clear violations of United Nations Security Council resolutions, and that is why the National Assembly is condemning Pyongyang's provocative acts, which are threatening the peace and security of the Korean Peninsula and the international community. The resolution also states the recent launch will only further isolate North Korea from the international community and warns Pyongyang that it will pay a price for the ensuing damage. This is the second resolution passed this year, after one unanimously passed earlier this week, condemning Pyongyang's fourth nuclear test last month. Aside from that, there are 2 other North Korea-related bills in the Assembly concerning counterterrorism measures and human rights that are awaiting lawmakers' consideration. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The highest-ranking military officers of South Korea, the United States and Japan are set to hold a video conference on North Korea's recent long-range missile launch. Officials say Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff General Lee Sun-jin will coordinate a response and share intelligence with his American and Japanese counterparts, General Joseph Dunford and Admiral Katsutoshi Kawano. The talks were originally scheduled for an earlier date, but were pushed back due to signs North Korea was about to launch that missile. All 3 countries have heightened their defense cooperation in the wake of the launch. Now, North Korea's recent long-range missile launch seems to have helped South Korea make up its mind over the deployment of a US missile defense system known as THAAD. That is short for Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense. South Korean and US officials will meet soon to hash out the details. Hwang Ho-jun has the details.
A South Korea-US joint working group will hold their first meeting this month to discuss deploying a THAAD battery to the Korean peninsula in the coming weeks. Negotiations were fast-tracked following North Korea's missile launch last weekend. Seoul's defense ministry says Jang Kyung-soo, Director General of the ministry's Policy Planning Bureau, and the ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command's Assistant Chief of Staff for Strategy, Plans and Policy, Robert Hedlund, will lead the delegations. The main agenda is the rapid deployment of the ballistic missile defense system. There are 4 candidate locations: Pyeongtaek, Wonju, Gunsan, and Daegu. Pyeongtaek in Gyeonggi-do Province is one of the leading candidates, given that the U.S. military's 2nd Infantry Division will relocate to the region by the end of this year, and the battery could be used to defend the densely populated Seoul and Gyeonggi metropolitan areas. Another issue is the placement cost, which will be determined under the Status of Forces Agreement governing the status of American troops deployed in South Korea. One THAAD battery is expected to cost around $830 million. Once deployment is decided, Seoul will cover site and facility costs, while the U.S. will assume deployment, operation, and maintenance costs. Washington plans to operate 7 THAAD batteries across the world, including 4 on the mainland United States, by 2019. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Now, Kim Jong-un's reign of terror appears to be continuing, with another high-ranking North Korean official apparently executed. Sources say Army General Ri Yong-gil probably paid the ultimate price for criticizing Kim's leadership appointments. Won Jang-ho has this report.
A South Korean government source revealed on Wednesday that Ri Yong-gil, the North's chief of general staff to the People's Army, had been executed earlier this month under charges of corruption and pursuit of personal gains. The execution is thought to have taken place sometime around February 2nd and 3rd, when a joint meeting between the North's ruling Workers' Party and the military was being held. The government source said Ri may have opposed Kim's recent military appointments, or there could have been a plot to remove Ri among those within the party's leadership. There has been no official confirmation of his death from North Korea. Ri was appointed as the Chief of General Staff in 2013. He worked closely with Kim, and he was seen accompanying him on inspection tours in the regime's defense ministry as recently as January. But he was notably missing during the joint meeting and celebration events after the regime's missile launch on Sunday. This is the latest in a long list of executions of officials ordered by Kim. Over 100 officials are said to have been purged since Kim came to power in late 2011. In comparison, his father Kim Jong-il, and former leader of the communist state, is only said to have killed 10 officials during his early years in power. The most notable purge to date was Kim's uncle Chang Song-taek in 2013 for alleged treason. He was at one time considered the second most powerful man in North Korea. These purges of officials suggest Kim is continually looking to assert his authority and consolidate his power. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea's financial officials have come together to evaluate the potential risk posed by North Korea's recent long-range missile launch. Their assessment, it probably won't have that much of an effect on the local economy. Our Kim Min-ji has this report.
The country's central bank convened another meeting on Wednesday to assess the impact of North Korea's recent missile launch on the South Korean economy. Based on what's happened in the past and given South Korea's sound economic fundamentals, the general consensus is that the North's latest provocation will have a limited impact on the local economy and financial market. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said that the central bank will stay alert as North Korea could become a risk factor for the financial market at any time. With regard to the recent downturn in major stock markets around the world, including Japan, the top central banker attributed the decline to global uncertainties, saying it's not because of Pyongyang. Lee did say, however, that the global economy will continue to face challenges down the road. This as Japan has pushed its interest rate down to the negative territory, and on top of that, there are also lingering uncertainties in China, falling global oil prices, and the slowdown in the global economy.
Financial markets of advanced markets are showing signs of increased instability since the start of the Lunar New Year holiday. It will take some time before they stabilize.
The nation's finance ministry was also on the same page, saying no major trends have been detected since the launch. It's operating a 24-hour monitoring system and says it will take swift action to protect the local economy if there is a threat posed by new sanctions from the international community or further provocations by North Korea. Meanwhile, stock and foreign exchange markets in South Korea and other Asian regions that have been closed for the Lunar New Year holiday will reopen on Thursday. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
US Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen has signaled that the Fed might delay but not abandon planned interest rate increases amid the ongoing risk to the US economy. Giving her semi-annual testimony to Congress on US monetary policy on Wednesday local time, Yellen said tumbling stock prices, a slowdown in China and a global reassessment of credit risk could throw the US off an otherwise solid course. However, Yellen added that the labour market should continue to improve and inflation will eventually rise towards the Fed's target of 2%. She said the Fed expects to keep raising rates gradually, but stressed there was no preset course. The Fed decided to raise its benchmark interest rate by 25 basis points in December of last year, the first rate increase since 2006. A pregnant woman in Australia has tested positive for the Zika virus after recently returning from a trip to El Salvador. Local health authorities say the woman was diagnosed with the disease in southeast Queensland on Wednesday. They say the virus was acquired overseas Officials say no further information will be released on the pregnant woman. Australia has reported a number of cases of Zika as a result of travellers infected overseas returning to their home country. The risk of an outbreak in that country is considered low, though. The mosquito-borne virus is suspected of causing a surge in brain-damaged babies in Brazil and some other Latin American countries. Well, that is all we have for now. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to our newscast. We'll be back throughout the day with more news stories. Until then, goodbye.